The tale revolves around 4 friends, yet the calamity befell only 3. The 4th was en route to join his companions, but was spared from the tragedy. Naresh, who shared this narrative, spoke of a village and a place, though he hesitated to reveal too much. The events were harrowing, and as they unfolded, they formed a story that seemed almost unreal. Rohit, Surya, Naresh, and their companion were college friends. One day, they concocted a plan, a night out filled with cigarettes and beer. The preparations began. They gathered food, procured drinks, and secured a bike. Naresh was tasked with finding a suitable location. According to the plan, they were to meet in Naresh's village. The villagers typically retired to bed by 10 p.m., and Naresh suggested a secluded spot within the village for their gathering. Everything proceeded as planned. Rohit, Suresh, and Uday set off towards Naresh's village, their spirits high. However, as they neared the village, Naresh called, expressing concern that the friend who was supposed to host them had backed out. Suresh proposed an alternative, finding an open field where they could continue with their plans undisturbed. They eventually decided on a farm near Naresh's village. As they made their way, they noticed an unfinished house by the roadside. Uday, intrigued, suggested they use this half-constructed structure as their venue. The house had cement pillars, unplastered walls, and an open upper floor. A board in Marathi warned against trespassing, claiming the place belonged to Vishram Rao Pratap Rao Jadhav. Yet, the allure of the abandoned site was too strong to resist. Rohit convinced the others to enter. The desolate atmosphere of the house, with its overgrown walls and unfinished floors, only added to its eerie charm. They made their way to the first floor, where they settled in, lighting cigarettes and enjoying the solitude. Rohit noticed something unusual, a man standing below, staring intently at him. He assumed it was Naresh, trying to locate them. But when he called out, there was no response. The man below disappeared, and a sense of unease began to creep in. Rohit tried to reach Naresh again, but there was no network signal. Uday also struggled with his phone, finding a signal only when he extended his hand outside the house. Rohit decided to check the upper floor, hoping for better reception. As he ascended, he felt an unsettling presence, though when he looked back, there was no one there. The upper floor offered no reprieve. Despite the open space, the network was non-existent, as if something in the house was blocking it. Frustrated, Rohit descended, determined to step outside and call Naresh. He finally managed to reach him, but the call was plagued with interference. Naresh mentioned something about the location, but Rohit couldn't understand clearly. Rohit then noticed a figure standing on the ground floor, silently watching him. The figure introduced himself as Vishram Rao Pratap Rao Jadhav, the owner of the house. Rohit, realizing the gravity of the situation, apologized for the intrusion. But before he could explain further, the figure lunged at him. Rohit's agonized screams filled the house, echoing up to the first floor where Uday and Suresh were waiting. The 2 friends, startled by the noise, rushed to check on Rohit. To their horror, they found him coming up the stairs, visibly shaken. Rohit stammered about something being terribly wrong with the place, mentioning the name of Vishram Rao. Suresh, trying to lighten the mood, laughed it off, but the tension was palpable. Suddenly, the sound of a mobile phone ringing broke the silence. It was Naresh, finally arriving on his bike. Suresh went to fetch Rohit's phone, only to find it lying on the ground outside near a water tank. As Naresh approached, he too sensed something was amiss. He saw someone standing behind Suresh, just as a forceful shove sent Suresh tumbling down the stairs. Uday rushed to help, but it was too late. Suresh was badly injured, his leg broken and his shoulder dislocated. Naresh, realizing the danger, tried to drag Suresh out of the house. Meanwhile, Uday caught sight of the same figure, Vishram Rao, standing in the corner, laughing maniacally. The friends, now terrified, managed to escape, but the ordeal left them traumatized. The next day, after taking Suresh to a hospital, they learned the truth. Vishram Rao Pratap Rao Jadhav had indeed died years ago, murdered by his brother in a dispute over the very land where the house stood. But even in death, Vishram Rao's spirit lingered, preventing anyone from claiming the property. The government eventually seized the land, placing a new sign that declared it state property. Yet the old sign, with Vishram Rao's name, still stood, a haunting reminder of the horrors the friends had endured. Their story, one of trespass and terror, ended with legal consequences. But the scars left by that night would remain with them forever. As the days turned into weeks, the trauma of that night lingered in the minds of Naresh, Uday, and Suresh. They tried to return to their daily lives, but the weight of their encounter with the supernatural continued to cast a long shadow over them. Suresh's recovery was slow and painful. His broken leg and dislocated shoulder required extensive treatment, and the physical scars were a constant reminder of their ill-fated adventure. Mentally, the ordeal took an even greater toll. He struggled with nightmares and an unshakable sense of dread whenever he thought about that cursed house. Naresh, too, found it difficult to move on. He had always been the one to suggest their escapade, and the guilt of leading his friends into danger weighed heavily on him. He felt responsible for their suffering and found solace only in the fact that they had survived. Still, he couldn't shake the image of Vishram Rao's vengeful spirit from his mind. Uday, although less physically injured, was no less affected. The experience left him with an acute sense of paranoia. He avoided dark, isolated places and became overly cautious in his everyday life. The once carefree college student now approached every situation with a newfound wariness. As for the house itself, it remained abandoned, a monument to the tragedy that had occurred within its walls. Despite the government's claims to the property, no one dared to approach it. The eerie presence of Vishram Rao's spirit seemed to hang over the place, a deterrent to anyone who might consider trespassing. In the months that followed, the story of that night became a local legend. The tale was recounted with a mix of horror and disbelief, a cautionary narrative about the dangers of ignoring warnings and the supernatural forces that might lie in wait. Naresh, Uday, and Suresh found themselves the subjects of this tale, often questioned about their experiences. They answered with a mix of reluctance and resignation, their faces reflecting the lasting impact of their encounter. Though the incident had legal repercussions, with the three friends facing minor charges for trespassing, the true cost was much greater. They had come face to face with something beyond their understanding, something that defied logic and reason. The night had changed them irrevocably, teaching them a harsh lesson about respect for the unknown and the consequences of their curiosity. Years later, the house still stood as a grim reminder of that fateful night. The signboard had been replaced, but the legend of Vishram Rao Pratap Rao Jadhav lived on, a spectral warning to those who might venture too close. Naresh, Uday, and Suresh had moved on with their lives, but the memory of their harrowing experience remained a part of them, a ghostly echo of their brush with the otherworldly. The story had become a part of local folklore, a chilling account passed down through generations. It served as a reminder that some places are best left undisturbed, and that there are forces beyond human comprehension waiting in the shadows, ready to assert their dominance over those who dare to intrude. The Factory Shift. My name is Neeraj, and I'm from Nagpur, Maharashtra. The event I'm about to recount still haunts me to this day. It was the moment I truly understood the meaning of fear, and even now, my soul trembles whenever I recall that night. Growing up in a poor family, life wasn't easy. We were constantly struggling, which made it difficult for me to focus on my studies. Eventually, I had to quit school altogether and take up odd jobs to help my family. As I grew older, I started looking for better opportunities, hoping to find a stable job with a decent salary. One day, a friend of mine told me about a job opening at a factory in Nagpur. The salary was good, and it seemed like the break I had been waiting for. The very next day, I went for the interview. It went well, and the manager informed me that I would start with a day of training before moving on to the night shift for a week. They promised to increase my salary after that first week. I was thrilled and immediately accepted the job. When I told my friend about the job and the night shifts, his face turned pale. He urged me not to take the job, telling me strange things had happened at that factory, and people had even lost their lives. But I dismissed his concerns, thinking he was just jealous of my progress. After all, I was getting a good job with a high salary, something I had desperately needed for a long time. Ignoring his warnings, I went ahead with the training the next day. It seemed simple enough, but something felt off as I prepared for my first night shift. That night, I arrived at the factory around 11 p.m. After having dinner at home, I walked to the factory. When I arrived, the place seemed deserted, except for a distant watchman. I asked him who else was in the factory, and he told me that it was closed, leaving me confused. I should have sensed something was wrong, but I ignored the unease growing inside me and went inside. The factory was quiet, eerily so. I locked the gate behind me and turned on the main power supply. Then I sat there, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. They hadn't taught me how to operate the machines or given me any specific tasks. I felt someone standing behind me, and I heard the faint sound of breathing near my ear. But when I turned around, no one was there. Brushing it off as a trick of my imagination, I decided to clean the machines and oil them. As I moved through the production department, I felt like someone was following me, matching my every step. I looked around, but saw nothing. My unease grew with each passing minute, but I tried to push it aside. It wasn't until the power suddenly went out at 12:15 a.m. that I truly began to panic. The factory was plunged into complete darkness. I fumbled in the toolbox for a torch, but couldn't find it. I felt the presence of someone behind me again, and this time, it was stronger, more palpable. My heart raced as I moved through the dark, empty factory, stumbling over equipment and feeling something or someone following me. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. My blood ran cold, and I spun around, but there was no one there. Terrified, I tried to open the factory gate, but it wouldn't budge. My panic grew as I realized I was trapped. The air around me felt thick and oppressive, like a storm was about to break. I started to cry, wishing I had listened to my friend. Desperate, I ran toward the emergency exit, hoping to find a way out. But as I reached for the door, I felt an invisible force pulling me back. It was as if something was trying to drag me into the darkness. I screamed for help, but my voice echoed through the empty factory. There was no one there to save me. My legs gave out beneath me, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. I felt something cold and sharp grip my arms, and then I saw them. Shadowy figures moving around me, their faces twisted in anger and despair. One of them, a dark, blurry figure with hollow eyes, loomed over me. Thick smoke swirled around it, filling the air with the stench of burnt flesh and rotten meat. The figure reached out and grabbed me, dragging me across the cold, hard floor. I felt its icy claws digging into my skin, and I screamed in agony. My vision blurred as I struggled to breathe, the shadows closing in around me. The last thing I remember before I blacked out was the sound of the factory's machines coming to life on their own, whirring and clanking in the darkness. When I woke up, I was lying outside the factory. My clothes were torn, and dried blood covered my body. The morning sun burned my skin as I dragged myself under the shade of a nearby tree. I had no idea how I had ended up outside or what had happened during the night. All I knew was that I had barely escaped with my life. Later, I learned that the factory had a dark history. The land it was built on had once been the site of a terrible tragedy, and the spirits of those who had died there were said to haunt the place. The manager had never mentioned it, and no one had warned me. But I knew now that there were forces beyond our understanding, and that night, I had come face to face with them. I never returned to that factory. The horror of that night stayed with me, a constant reminder that some places are better left alone. Here's a more detailed version of your story in simple English. The first story I want to share was told to me by my cousin, Dee. Dee lives in a village, and this story is about his friend Kishore. It's a true story that happened to Kishore. Kishore worked at a place called the Maharashtra Industrial Development Corporation. This is a place where small and big industries come together to do their work, and it provides space for companies on behalf of the government. After finishing his night shift, Kishore would ride his bike back to his village, which is about 30 kilometers away from his workplace. One night, at around 11:30 p.m., Kishore started his ride home. As he was traveling along the highway, he decided to take a detour because he wanted to smoke a cigarette. He couldn't find a cigarette shop nearby, so he rode his bike along a parallel road to the highway. After traveling a few kilometers, Kishore's bike suddenly broke down. He tried to start it again, but it wouldn't start. The road was very lonely and deserted. As he was checking the bike, he noticed a woman standing by the roadside. She was dressed in a green sari and looked like she was from a village. She seemed to be around 40 to 45 years old. The woman approached Kishore and said, "My son is sick. I need to go home. Can you please give me a ride?" Kishore replied, "I'm sorry, but my bike just broke down. I can't help you right now." Surprisingly, as soon as he tried to start the bike again, it started immediately, which was unusual because it had been difficult to start before. Feeling a bit guilty, Kishore decided to help the woman. He asked her to get on the bike, and she did. As they were riding, Kishore asked, "Where do you live?" The woman replied, "It's not far. I'll tell you when we get closer to my house." Kishore found the situation odd. It seemed strange to him that a woman with a sick child would be standing alone on a deserted road at that time of night. Despite his curiosity, he continued to drive. As they went further, Kishore saw another woman standing on the road ahead. This woman was also wearing a green sari and had a similar appearance to the one sitting on his bike. She raised her hand to stop his bike, but Kishore didn't stop because the woman on the bike was already with him. When the bike got closer to the second woman, it started to slow down on its own. Kishore felt like he had lost control of the bike, and it moved towards the woman. As the bike stopped, the second woman said, "My son is sick. Please take me home." Kishore was shocked to hear the same words from both women. He realized that the woman who had been sitting on his bike earlier was now standing in front of him. The woman on the bike had disappeared, and Kishore felt a chill run down his spine. Terrified, Kishore looked around but saw no one. The bike started moving on its own again, as if it was being controlled by an unseen force. Kishore's hands and legs were shaking, and he felt like he was going to have a heart attack. He saw the same woman standing by the road again, waving her hand full of bangles. Kishore didn't understand why this was happening. The bike seemed to be stuck in a loop, taking him back to the same place repeatedly. When Kishore stopped the bike again, the woman was angry. She said, "I told you to take me home. If you don't, I will take your life." The woman then sat behind Kishore on the bike. He was so scared that he tried to get off, but the bike fell to the ground and Kishore staggered as he tried to stand up. The woman glared at him, and her eyes began to bleed. Her clothes turned red with blood, and she looked horrified. Kishore, completely frightened, ran away from the scene. He knew he needed to leave quickly, or he might not survive. He finally managed to flag down another vehicle and reached home. When he arrived, he had a high fever. His family was worried and asked him what had happened. Kishore told them about the strange woman, how she kept appearing, and how her head had started bleeding. After hearing Kishore's story, his family was scared. They contacted village priest and told him about the incident. The priest went to the village and asked about the woman. They found out that the woman had lived in the village years ago. She had been hit by a truck while going to get a doctor for her sick son, and she had died in that spot. The villagers knew about the woman's ghost and avoided the area at night. The priest assured Kishore's family that he would take care of the matter. The next day, Kishore's family and friends went to find his bike. They discovered that the bike had been turned sideways, likely after the accident. The villagers confirmed the ghost story and told them that the woman's spirit still wandered the area. Kishore was relieved that he was fine, but the fear of that night stayed with him. Whenever he tells the story, he still feels a chill and trembles as he remembers the horrifying experience. I hope this helps with your storytelling. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to adjust. Hello friends, my name is Pankaj. I reside in Kanpur and I have a story to share. One that revolves around my beloved daughter, Chutki. A few years ago, when I was working in a different city, I took Chutki and my wife Rama for a walk at the station. Chutki, who was 4 years old at the time, discovered an old toy stick, which she clung to with great enthusiasm. Upon our return home, I noticed that Chutki was unusually attached to this toy. She claimed to have found it on a tree at the station, where she had been sitting alone and sad. The toy played a simple melody when wound up, but it seemed to captivate her. Despite my initial indifference, Rama grew increasingly concerned. She noted that Chutki had stopped leaving the house entirely and spent all her time with the toy. I dismissed Rama's worries as overblown, attributing Chutki's behavior to her fascination with the new toy. I believed she would soon lose interest and return to her usual activities. However, Rama's concerns persisted. She reported that Chutki refused to go outside, even to play with friends. When prompted, Chutki claimed that all her friends were at home, and she saw no need to go out. Rama and I disagreed on the matter, but it was clear that Chutki's behavior was increasingly peculiar. One day, I decided to take Chutki to the doctor to address her strange behavior. The doctor explained that Chutki was exhibiting symptoms of a condition where the mind creates imaginary scenarios and voices. He advised me to take her outside and engage her with new toys and activities to break her fixation. Following the doctor's advice, I attempted to take Chutki to the park and introduce new toys. Despite my efforts, Chutki's behavior did not improve. She continued to resist going outside and spent most of her time locked away in her room with the toy. One day, as I was preparing to leave the house, I overheard Chutki talking to someone. I opened the door to find her alone, playing with the same toy. The room was empty, but the unsettling whispers continued. I decided to investigate the toy further and discovered that it was identical to the one we had purchased. When I confronted Chutki about the toy, she became enraged and threw it outside. That night, she locked herself in her room and refused to come out. Rama was distraught, and I was at a loss for how to handle the situation. The following morning, I found Chutki had left the house. Her room was eerily empty, save for a disturbing drawing she had made. The drawing depicted children playing with a shadowy figure. Alongside it was a note written in Chutki's handwriting, stating that she was leaving with her friends and would never return. Rama and I reported Chutki's disappearance to the police, but despite extensive searches, we found no trace of her. The mystery of Chutki's disappearance and the ominous drawings left behind haunt me to this day. The weight of my regrets and the haunting absence of my daughter linger in the empty rooms of our house. This is the tale of Kumar and Sumati. Kumar, originally from the southern region, worked in Mumbai in 1996. He met Sumati, a member of a modest family in Mumbai. Their mutual affection blossomed, but their families opposed the union due to societal prejudices. Undeterred, the couple sought the court's intervention and married in 1998. Prior to their marriage, Kumar, along with friends, lived in a slum. Post-marriage, they rented a house in the same area. The residence, recently renovated, had formerly been a hut. The walls were still damp, freshly coated with white cement. The house was modest, with a small kitchen and a bathroom divided by a low partition, covered in local language tiles. In those days, Kumar and Sumati worked different shifts. Kumar, earning more with his night shifts, intended to save money to move to a better residence. However, they were not yet ready to make that move. One afternoon, as Kumar rested at home while Sumati was at work, he experienced an unsettling sensation. At around 5 o'clock, he felt a hand on his shoulder, which he initially dismissed as an insect. But then he heard the tinkling of bangles, a sound that jolted him awake. When he looked around, no one was there. Kumar then went outside, sitting by the doorstep and filling a bucket with water from a public tap. A friend happened by and inquired about Sumati, who was at work. Kumar, surprised, mentioned that Sumati wasn't home. The friend, who had seen someone inside, was puzzled. After checking the house and finding no one, he left, leaving Kumar to ponder the strange occurrence. Back inside, Kumar heard the tinkling sound of bangles again. He searched the house but found no one. As he prepared for the evening, a fire broke out while cooking. Sumati screamed, and Kumar quickly extinguished the flames, which had left a peculiar mark on the wall resembling a human figure. There was no indication of anything supernatural, but the incident was unsettling. That night, Kumar experienced the same eerie sounds while sleeping. The noise seemed to come from outside his room. Kumar's discomfort grew as he perceived the sounds increasing. He felt a hand on his shoulder and saw a shadowy figure on the wall, its face emerging. Terrified, he remained in bed, unable to muster the courage to investigate further. The next morning, Sumati was disturbed by the events of the previous night. Kumar shared his own unsettling experiences, leading them to decide to confront their landlord. Upon inquiry, they learned that the house had been the scene of a tragic event. The landlord revealed that his daughter had been brutally killed by her alcoholic husband, who had set the house on fire. The house had been rebuilt, but the trauma lingered. Kumar and Sumati, shaken by the landlord's story, decided to leave the house immediately. The loss of their home was a significant blow, a price they would pay for the rest of their lives. Created with AI prompt, text corrector, and rephraser. aiprm.com/prompts unsure/writing/18008115712a. My name is Siddharth, and I am from Bengaluru. I work for an IT company where I met Neelam, a college friend. A few days later, we got married. After our marriage, Neelam and I wanted to go somewhere together, but our jobs kept us occupied. We both loved trekking, but we hadn't had the chance to go during college. Eventually, we planned a trip to celebrate our vacation by visiting the hills and forests of Maharashtra. However, we ended up in an unfamiliar location not shown on the map. We lost our way in a dense forest where sunlight barely penetrated. Unable to determine our direction, we continued searching for a path. Neelam pointed out that it was getting darker and we needed to find a way out quickly. As we progressed, Neelam expressed her discomfort, feeling as though someone was watching us from behind the trees. Despite her fears, she suggested we keep going until we found help. We eventually stumbled upon a dilapidated house and approached it for assistance. The house looked abandoned, and after knocking several times with no response, I was startled when a grumpy old man appeared and told us not to be afraid. He invited us in and advised us to stay the night, warning us that the forest could be dangerous. He insisted that we stay inside and not venture out, claiming that it would get dark very soon. Though skeptical, we decided to spend the night. Inside, the house was dusty and neglected, with spider webs and old, stagnant water. After a bit of cleaning, we settled down for the night. As we were drifting off to sleep, I heard knocking on the door. Neelam was worried, recalling the old man's warning not to step outside. I cautiously opened the door, but found no one there. The knocking continued, becoming more insistent and frightening. I ignored it and closed the door again, only to hear Neelam calling from outside. I saw her standing near the door frame, but when I tried to reach her, she seemed to be pulled away into the forest. I was terrified and couldn't bring myself to step outside. Neelam's desperate pleas and cries grew distant, and eventually, she disappeared into the forest. In the morning, I found her lifeless body near a small river. She had been attacked by wild animals. At the hospital, the doctors revealed that this wasn't an isolated incident. They explained that many years ago, a sorcerer had been expelled from his home and cursed the forest. Anyone who ventured into that area would be haunted by restless spirits. Neelam's fate was a tragic consequence of this curse. I was devastated by the revelation. Neelam's experience had left her deeply traumatized, and I still remember the haunting sound of knocking. The doctor explained that the fear we experienced was what gave the spirits their power.